Thanks, Alex. Good afternoon from Austin, Texas, and thank you all for joining us today. And welcome to today's webinar, Intro to Oral History. My name is Leah DeForest, and I'm the Communications Manager with Texas Digital Library. I'm also joined by my colleagues Alex Suarez, our Administrative Associate and Conference Planner, and Courtney Mumont, our Deputy Director. So Texas Digital Library is grateful to our members, some of whom are here today, some of whom are presenting today. We're grateful to members who put your trust in Texas Digital Library to provide essential infrastructure and services, which provide online secure access to your digital collections and materials. We are inviting any institution interested in joining our community to reach out to us. We need your energy and expertise to continue growing the digital library community in this region. We are especially interested in partnering with our colleagues at HBCUs across Texas. And I invite you all to join TDL and connect with our amazing, fun, and brilliant community. Now for a little housekeeping. We at TDL are big fans of Bill and Ted, not only because they are most triumphant, but especially because they believe in being excellent to each other. So we ask that you here today also be excellent to each other. We're dedicated to providing an experience for everyone that is free from all forms of harassment and inclusive of all people. We ask that everyone here today be considerate and respectful in speech and action, attempt collaboration before conflict, refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior in speech, and be mindful of your environment and your fellow participants. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. We will publish slides and recordings and share them with you all in attendance today, as well as with our members, partners, and colleagues in libraries and archives. So just a quick tutorial of Zoom. If you see on the left-hand side, please keep your microphones and videos muted until our Q&A session at the end. Presenters will also keep their mics and videos muted until it's their turn to present. We hope that you'll use the chat box to say hello and let others know you're here or make a comment. And if you have a question, please do type it into chat. We're going to save up all the questions to the end, and we'll go through them first come, first serve. So on with the show. I want to thank today's presenters for allowing us to learn from your experience. And I'm so excited to introduce Adrienne Cain, Assistant Director at the Institute for Oral History at Baylor University. She's also the Secretary Treasurer for the Texas Oral History Association. And to Abra Schnur, University Archivist and Records Manager at Trinity University, and she is the President of the Texas Oral History Association. And Abra, I'm going to stop sharing and hand things off to you.
Thank you, Leah. Okay, let me get my screen set up. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay?
Looks great.
Great. So we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being able to join us today. We are so excited to be partnering with TDL for this oral history series. We're hoping we'll be able to provide insight into some of the considerations one needs to take when developing an oral history project. And since I imagine that the majority of attendees today are associated with digital repositories in one way or another, we hope that this gives a bit of background into the immense work that it takes to create these particular digital files that you would be managing. So the Texas Oral History Association, or Toha, is a network of oral history practitioners that promotes the use of professional interviewing and archiving standards of oral history projects and interviews. Toha was established out of an annual Oral History Association conference that was held in San Antonio in 1982. We became a nonprofit organization in 1983 and assisted the state with their sesquicentennial commission hosting oral history workshops. In 1993, we began producing The Sound Historian, an annual journal featuring oral history work in Texas. Every year, we hold a session at the Texas State Historical Association Conference. And since 2012, we've hosted our own annual conference, with this year being our first virtual. So here we have our current board of directors. In addition to myself, we have Mary Kale out of San Marcos, Jesus Esparza out of Houston, Jenna Heath out of Austin, and Kyle Wilkinson out of Plano. We have Adrienne Cain, who is the secretary and treasurer, Stephen Seeloff, who is the sound historian editor, and Dan Utley, who is the book review editor for the sound historian. And in an effort to remain a relevant and sustainable organization, this year we've committed to trying to diversify our membership of practitioners, being proactive in resource sharing and support, and actively seeking presentations outside of academic circles for our programming. Today, we're going to cover a lot, maybe even too much. We are going to be covering what oral history is and isn't, basic facets to project development, the interview process, and preservation considerations. And we could really devote an entire presentation to each of those sections outlined today. But as I mentioned earlier, we're just trying to provide an overview into some important factors that one needs to consider when doing oral history. And with that, I will hand it over to Adrienne to get us going.
Thank you, Abra. Okay, so many of you may have a understanding or have heard the term oral history before, but what exactly is oral history? The next one. So oral history is a sound recording of historical information that's obtained from an interview. And in this interview, this person that you're interviewing is talking about their life experience, or eyewitness account of a particular experience. So with these oral histories, what you're able to do is that listeners can better understand how individuals from different viewpoints, different points in society who experience different errors, how they went about with their everyday lives. And again, this can include just the day-by-day account of their life, or if they witnessed an actual event or important event or an era. So with these interviews, they are preserved, and we preserve them because we want to make them available for future researchers so they have an understanding of that person's life and experience. So why is oral history important? Well, for one, it helps us fill in gaps in the historical record. So oral history is a tool that is used to supplement history. It helps us to capture diverse viewpoints. It also helps us to enrich in a historical understanding, and help us understand change. So oral history projects can be used to, I like to say that history itself can tell us the who, what, when, and where, but oral history really focuses on the whys and the hows. Okay, so we basically know the perspective that history is taught from. Usually the people who have written history are old, rich, white, heterosexual, and male. But with oral history, what we're able to do is capture diverse viewpoints. Unfortunately, if you are one of these categories that are, what I will say on this slide, more colorful, your story is not in the mainstream. It's not a prominent story. Oral history helps us to capture these diverse viewpoints so that they're available and that people can learn and experience those viewpoints.
Okay, so I'm going to be the sort of party crasher here and try to get you to challenge some of your notions about what you think oral history is. More than ever, media is saturated with the term oral history. Martin Meeker, who's the director for the Oral History Center at Berkeley, has said that oral history has moved from academic jargon to pop culture ubiquity. Oral historian Lynn Abrams notes that the term is so diluted that every interview conducted with an individual could be labeled as an oral history. So I'm the first to admit that I thought that StoryCorps was what oral history was when I was petitioning to register for a graduate level oral history course as an undergrad. Oral history sounds similar to many things you think of when you hear the term oral history: oral tradition, storytelling, testimony. And oral history has the ability to democratize history, and that is a very powerful, welcomed thing. It can affirm the narrator's own experience. It can celebrate a community's own history. But because of that, there leaves an opening for oral history to be used for a romanticized or nostalgic view of the past without really getting into the understanding as to why or how things are remembered the way they are. And that is the point. It is to go, that is the crux of oral history work. It is to go in depth into the notions that people have and explore how people interpret their own experiences, and more broadly, how as society and how as a determined collective history shape the remembrances of those experiences over time. The practice of interviewing is used in a wide range of disciplines: social sciences as part of qualitative research, the medical and legal profession as a sort of evidential tool, also in educational and research tool and learning environments. It's obviously used in journalism. So how to distinguish from what an actual oral history project, interview, or product is versus perhaps a storytelling project, a journalistic interview, a deposition, or a qualitative survey of questions. So an old acquaintance of mine designs covers for Entertainment Weekly, and he posted about one of their issues doing an oral history of the movie Office Space. And this is what it looked like. That was the header. Here was a brief introduction to the article, and then there was this long thread of quotations taken from, I'm assuming, longer interviews. So is this oral history? Is this a product or interpretation of an oral history project? There's several characteristics to oral history. Oral history is not recordings of conversations, events, speeches, audiovisual diaries, testimonies. They're not recordings that lack the guided dialogue between an interviewer and an interviewee. And oral history recognizes that subjectivity. If you don't understand the impact of your own physical self and your own experiences that they have on the interview, then you're not doing oral history. If you don't understand how question development and your guidance of the interview doesn't shape the outcome of the interaction between you and the interviewee, you're not doing oral history, because part of the analysis of an oral history project is to have a reflection of oneself and how that's impacted the project. Oral history is in depth. They're not interviews that are timed. It's not, okay, you have 15 minutes in a recording booth to tell me about growing up in XYZ town. They usually take several hours and several sessions to complete. Oral history are not recorded without the intent to preserve and make available to a wider audience, as Adrienne has said. So interviews that are conducted for a quick informational value with no intention for preservation is not oral history. And oral history is historical in intent and looks for insights and perspectives into the past. So it's not capturing events as they are happening. And if you do happen to be doing interviews as an event is unfolding, such as COVID, there needs to be follow-up later on to gain that historical perspective. And at the root of what makes an oral history is the methodology by which it is conducted and processed. Oral history is an interview becomes an oral history only when it's been recorded, processed in some way, and made available. Availability for general research, reinterpretation, and verification defines oral history. That's from Donald Ritchie. And then from Barbara Summers, these are both oral historians. Oral history is characterized by a structured, systematic planning process, thorough research, careful consideration of copyright, emphasis on the depth and detail of information collected, and adherence to strict processing techniques. So to make a solid oral history project, that process, that method in which you shape your project, conduct your interviews, make your interviews available for access and interpretation, needs to stay consistent across your project, and it needs to stay consistent across the discipline, which is why we have standards and best practices. So the field of oral history can produce quality interviews that can be used as primary documentation. Adrienne. Oh, you're muted.
Got it. Okay. So another thing that makes oral history unique is its devotion to ethics. Unlike journalism and the other oral history adjacent forms that Abra just talked about, oral history is deeply rooted in its standards and best practices. So our national association, the Oral History Association, has produced a suite of documents which encompasses the principles and best practices of oral history. And this is the standard that oral historians go by. And the website for that is listed here on the slide, but we'll be sure to put that in the chat later. So not only do we have these standards, these are what we would call kind of like almost the Bible for oral history. So there is this book, Guide to Oral History and the Law, written by John Neuenschwander. And this book, as you can see, well, all my notes are in here, but it's a rather thin book because we don't have too many legal issues in oral history. But if you are either starting an oral history project or managing or maintaining an oral history project, this is a great resource for you to have because it goes over donor agreements. What are your narrator's rights? Let's say that you're doing an interview and in the middle of the interview, your interviewee or narrator implicates someone of a crime. What do we do then? So this is not to scare you, but it's to prepare you for if these situations were to arise, how should you go about handling them? And again, with the principles and best practices from OHA, this is your ethical guide. So legal guide, oral history and the law, ethical guide would be principles and best practices. And we as oral historians are so heavy on ethics. What you are needing to do and what is important with this is that you're building rapport and building trust with your narrators. That is a very important core foundation for any oral history project. A lot of times the people that you are interviewing, this is the first time that they may be talking about this information or the first time anyone has even asked them to talk about their experience. I can't even tell you how many times that and I'm sure Abra will agree, that you sat down and asked someone to tell you about their experience and say, well, I've never told anyone this before, and it's there, it's documented, and just think about how important that is for the narrator, but also how vulnerable that is. What does that mean for them? And we respect that and want to protect that. Another important building block of this, and this is just like the basics of ethics that I'm covering right now. Informed consent. I literally spend almost an hour talking about informed consent in workshops. Informed consent is basically letting your narrator know any and everything about this oral history project, any potential outcomes, if you want to do a play, if that's something you perceive this turning into, letting them be informed about that. One thing I like to tell people is the last thing you want to do is have your narrator sitting at home on a Sunday watching PBS and see a full documentary that includes their story that they had no idea existed. So informed consent is very important. Also with that, we want to make sure that the people that we are interviewing are correctly represented. That's a big part of ethics as well. So what we do in order to do that, first, when you're building that trust and you're informing them of the process, that helps them to get comfortable because we want them to be themselves in the interview. We want them to have clear, candid conversation. We also want to give them the chance to review this information. So once the interview is over, they do have the opportunity to review. And what we will allow them to do is to correct or clear up any misunderstandings. So for example, if I said that I lived on Main Street growing up, and it wasn't Main Street, it was like Baker Street, that gives me an opportunity to correct that. And this is also important with names and places, because if you're talking to someone, let's say, who is 80 years old, they have 80 years of history that they're covering. So sometimes in the moment, it may be difficult to remember someone's name or the name of a school or a particular place that you were in. So we allow them to review so they can make those corrections if needed.
I've got 2 slides here. So you want to do an oral history project. There are a couple of things that you need to think about before you even begin on that adventure. And they are training and research. So training, this presentation is a good start, but there's simply not enough time to go over all the points of developing, implementing, and successfully completing an oral history project. And so I recommend 2 workshops, one with the Baylor Institute for Oral History, and the other with perhaps with the Voces Oral History Project out of UT. And if you've already decided in this workshop, actually, I kind of want to do something more like StoryCorps or storytelling, I'm glad that you've come to that understanding, but you're also going to need a lot of training as well, because StoryCorps products are highly edited, highly stylized 3-minute audio segments. So I would certainly recommend taking classes in addition to interviewing, perhaps on podcasting, audiovisual storytelling, and in both cases, in oral history and maybe a storytelling project, you definitely want training on audiovisual editing software and practice and training on how to handle your recording equipment. Because as all oral historians have experience in, is kind of messing up equipment in the middle of the interview. Research. Again, oral history is not just hitting the record button and letting the narrator talk about whatever they want to talk about. It requires the interviewer to be well versed on the topic they're covering. So they're more likely to get at those insights and meaning. And depending on the topic and how in it you are, this research could take months or years before you feel comfortable enough to begin interviewing people.
Okay, so we've all heard the saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So what I'm going to talk to you about is project planning and project development. So you want to make sure that you develop a plan for your project. So this plan will help you stay on track. It'll help you stay accountable. And it'll also help you address any concerns and any questions that may arise in the future. Another plus is that your project design will also help you when you're soliciting potential narrators. Because a lot of times when you approach somebody, it's like, I would like to talk to you about your experience with XYZ. Oh, well, why do you want to talk to me? I don't have much to say. Well, this project is involving this particular topic, which you are a part of. So you're able to use that project design or to get them to commit to the interview. And also, if you decide that you want to apply for grant funding, your project design is really good to have because that will help you with that process as well. Okay. All right, so what is your project design? What goes into the project design? Basically, you want to make sure, of course, that you have a title. I like to joke a lot with oral history, like we have dissertation titles. And I'm pretty sure some of y'all are familiar with this, where you have like your sexy or catchy title, colon, the oral history of blah, 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 blah. So you want to have a title, but you want to make sure that your title is clear and concise. So by reading your title, I should know what your project is about. It should discuss the topic and the purpose. So what is the reasoning for doing this project? What are we hoping to achieve? Methodology, as Abra spoke about just a couple of minutes ago, like, why is oral history the appropriate method for doing this? Sometimes you may come across a project or have an idea that you think is really great to have an oral history project for, but there are a couple of components you need to think about. So one, the topic has to be within living memory, meaning that there are people alive who can tell you about that experience. So for example, I could not do an oral history on the Civil War. Why? Because everyone's gone. And not to be morbid, but we are approaching the era where our World War II veterans, like oral histories with those veterans, are starting not to be in living memory anymore, because I think some of the youngest veterans at this point are in their high 90s. I want to say 97, 98 or so. But we've had a lot of programs across the country that have captured those voices. So we're very excited to have that and very fortunate to have that. But that is one thing you want to think about when you're thinking, okay, is oral history the appropriate method? And another thing with methodology is using oral history going to give me any new fresh ideas or fresh perspectives? Or is this repeating what is already out? Is there anything new that I'm gaining from doing an oral history project on this topic? Also, you want to have your scope. So I'm specifically focusing on this time and this place for this project. You want to make sure that you have a list of potential narrators. Now, you may not have an exact list, but you want to be sure that you're able to define the characteristics for your narrators. So if you're doing a project and you're documenting the history of an alumni association of a school, you want people associated with that school or surrounding that school because that they have information and knowledge about the topic. All right, also, you want to make sure that you go into selecting an archive. One of the biggest things with oral history, if you have not noticed, is that it is preserved for future researchers. So you want to start developing those relationships with an archive. I believe we have a session happening in the spring that's going to go a bit more into that, but you want to select an archive that is aligned with your project. So if I'm doing an oral history project on women's history, then okay, maybe I want to talk with the Women's Museum in Dallas about archiving it. Just you want to make sure they align. Any planned or potential outcomes, like what do you want to happen with this project? What are you thinking about making? How do you want to publish this? How do you want to display this? What does done look like? Like what do you need for your project to be complete? And then also your time frame for completing your project. I want to say that you want to be more on the generous side with your time frame, because oral history is a very labor intensive process. When we do a biannual workshop, biannual, 2 times a year workshop. My words are not working for me right now. And what we do is we grade homework and we give people feedback. And a lot of times people say, okay, I want to do 20 interviews in 2 weeks. Like, no, you want to give yourself some more time to complete that. So whenever you're thinking about your time frame, always give yourself a bit more of a buffer. And Abra, could you go to the last slide? Because I actually forgot something, I'm sorry. Okay, with project planning, because I have my screen blocked there, what you want to do is you want to start with an end in mind. So, okay, what are we wanting to get out of this? What is our end goal? What does finished look like? For different people in different projects, finished could look different. For some people, finished is, okay, we finished the set of interviews, have them archived, they're processed, okay. Or finished could be, we've done the transcripts, have a full index, all of this, that is what finished look like. So what finished could look like. So you want to establish that. How will you track your progress? You want to make sure that you have some sort of mechanism that you can gauge, how is this project going? Are there any adjustments that we need to make? And last, but certainly not least, especially if you're doing a project with multiple people or multiple institutions. So let's say I'm doing a partnership with my local public library and my city council. From the jump, you want to establish, okay, who was responsible for what? An MOU, something, just to make that very clear. Abra's laughing, but it's very serious. So you know, okay, who is going to be in charge for what? If something doesn't happen, or if something fails or something falls through the cracks, who is responsible for that? Once this is over, who owns what? That is something that is covered in oral history and the law, and also something that needs to be established from the beginning as well. Okay. So now we get to the actual interview. So before the interview, again, you want to build that rapport with your narrators. All right, then also you're going to go over your project. Again, have that project design available so everyone is clear and informed on what the project is and what the intended outcomes for the project are. You want to choose your recording location. Right now, it's a bit tricky. Typically what we would do is you want to choose a recording location that is comfortable for your narrator. Also somewhere that has good sound, that has stuff in it. So you want a place that has carpet so it helps absorb the sound. You also want to be cognizant of like what drives me crazy, the smoke detector battery beeping. What I like to do going into an interview, if it is in a different setting or someone's home, for example, is just to record a few seconds of silence and then play that back. So everything that you hear on that recording is what will live forever in the interview. Also just being knowledgeable of, does this person live near a rail line or a fire station? During interview day, any and everything can happen. So you just want to be aware of those things. But also just like now, I'm starting to do Zoom interviews. I want to make sure that the person I'm interviewing is correctly and clearly represented. So let's say that I am interviewing them and they're doing their interview in their home. Is there anything distracting in the background? Like if I were to do this in my home right now, you may see a pile of laundry in the corner. I don't want that to forever live on the recording. So I want to make sure I tell my narrator, hey, let's do this angle or try something different. You also want to check and see if there are any photos, scrapbooks, any items available that could help jog their memory, but also place a tangible item to their story. So maybe they were talking about in high school, they played in the band. Well, do you have any high school do you have any photos of that? Could you explain like who's in the photo, what was happening in this? That also helps jog their memory. During the pre-interview, you also want to discuss any potential topics and gather biographical data that may be missing. I'm cheating right now. I saw a little blip in the chat about if you're talking about sensitive topics. At this time, when you're building this rapport with your narrator and you're talking about what will be discussed in the interview, this will be a great time to gauge, okay, I would like to discuss your experience with XYZ. How would you like to go about talking about that? That's one way to start, but we'll cover that more in the Q&A. And also you develop your project outline. So what we like to do is talk more about having a topic outline versus the question list, because a question list can get you to thinking of questionnaire and just reading the questions off. You want to engage your narrator and have certain topics like, okay, tell me about, let's say we're going to talk about your background. That's a topic. That's when you go into the, okay, where were you born? Where are you from? So forth. But you want to have that topic because sometimes memory is not linear. So there may be some times when you're talking to someone and they jump ahead and answer a question that you already have. But by keeping that topic list, you're able to flow about more freely within that section of your outline. So with this interview, there are some items that you need to have on hand. Of course, the outline that we just discussed that you will develop. Your recording equipment. I know that seems very simple, but there have been times where, you know, I've arrived for an interview and it's like, oh, forgot my light. Oh, forgot the batteries. Oh, forgot the plug to plug this in. It happens to everyone. There's always something that is forgotten, so it's okay. You also want to make sure that you have like a notepad and a pencil to take notes while you're interviewing, because there may be a topic or something that your narrator mentions that you want to come back to, or something that's interesting or you may have a question about. So you want to have something to take notes with. You want a watch or some silent timekeeping device, just so you can gauge like how long have you been talking. If it's been more than, I say, an hour and a half or so, you may want to take a break to let your narrator get some water, take a bathroom break. So just to gauge how long you've been talking. Okay. And of course, any extra batteries or power cords. You're cool. Go ahead. Okay, so now we actually get to the interview. And this is the part that most people are familiar with, right? So during your interview, you want to make sure that you're engaging your narrator with open-ended questions and discussion. So how did you handle XYZ? Or tell me about your experience with. This allows you to get examples and details from your narrator. And you want to make sure that you're getting those examples and getting those elaborations. This person is bringing you into their world and telling you their experience. And what I'll even say to a narrator when I'm talking to them, it's like, I know that I know the answer to this question or what this particular thing is, but we are thinking about the future viewer. So there may be some things that I ask you to explain that you are aware that I know. This is especially important if you're talking to like government officials or people in the military who use a lot of acronyms. It's like, oh, okay, could you tell me what that acronym means? Because you want clarity in the interview. Make sure that you're taking good notes during the interview. Again, there may be some things that come up that you weren't expecting that you want to get back to and have a discussion about. And I will always say this, a good interviewer is a good listener. Yes, you've done your research, you have become well-versed on the topic that you're discussing, but you are there to learn. You are there to listen, to have them tell you their experience. So make sure listening is so important in the interview process. All right, now you've completed your interview. I shouldn't have to say this, but be sure that you thank your narrator for their time. Again, this may be the only time that this person has been asked to share this experience. And so that's a very big deal for them. You want to make a copy of the interview as soon as possible and leave the original alone. So the copy that you make will be your access copy. You need to transcribe, do anything like that, but you want to leave the original alone. Leave it alone, let it be safe in its own space, okay? You want to transcribe. I know transcribing is a pain in the butt. However, it is very helpful for researchers who are looking for information quickly or needing to search through an interview quickly. It also helps you to make your interview more accessible. So for example, if you have someone who may be hard of hearing or hearing impaired, your transcript is there to allow that interview to be accessible for them. And I have this in bold. I know I've stressed this a few times. Keep your narrators in the loop. Once the interview is done, you are not done with them, okay? You want to keep them abreast of what's going on in the project, what the next step is. Let's say that you get the opportunity to present at a conference. You can say, hey, I have this conference going on and I would really like to share your experience in my work. And just let them know what's happening. And then last, but certainly not least, we want to get into preserving those interviews, and Abra's going to take it from here.
Okay, so preservation of and access to interviews is one of the tenets of oral history. We've said it a couple of times so far. So it's really important that you have an archiving and preservation plan in place. And preservation and archiving tends to be thought of as something that you do after the fact, but it's a very present act. And it's an act that you should be thinking about at the beginning stages of the project. So there's a few things to think about in terms of preservation. One, the file storage, where's the data going to be stored? File formats and file types and file descriptions. And you know, being a presentation on TDL, I think that we are talking towards people who understand the importance, the challenges, and the implications regarding lack of digital preservation. So I won't go too far into that, but as a repository that will potentially be stewarding this material, it's important to understand where a digital archives or library fits into the realm of an oral history project. So remember the acronym LOCKS. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. So keeping multiple copies of your files on different storage media is crucial to that preservation of your digital files. So if you have access to a server space, that's a good location for those original preservation files. Like Adrienne mentioned, you're done recording, make a copy of it real quick, and then stick that baby up in a server or some dark archive cloud storage such as Amazon Glacier. Additionally, for backup preservation files, consider maybe getting some external hard drives, saving files on there, and storing them in different physical locations. And you'll be able to use those to make derivatives for access, use, and working copies. And regular cloud storage, such as Dropbox or Google Drive or your local computer, is a good place to house those. So again, preservation files, server, dark archive, backup copies, external hard drives, and then access working copies, cloud storage, or your computer. Oral history practitioners should select a repository that, one, relates to their project, as Adrienne had mentioned, but is also equipped to manage and access audio-visual materials and digital files for long-term use and preservation. So practitioners should be asking important preservation questions when they're shopping around for an archival repository. And you as a repository should be honest about your capabilities. So as an example, when I was working on my project of interviewing former employees of Braniff International in the DFW region, I contacted UT Dallas because they have a huge Braniff archival collection there. But they were very transparent, open about their abilities and the lack of being able to manage digital files at that time. So I ended up archiving their project at the University of North Texas because they've had a long standing oral history program, and it was still within the region of where the project was taking place. It was still in the DFW region. Another thing to talk about with an archive is how they're going to want those files and the supplemental material, because you could have physical material in addition to your digital files, how they want that transferred. What is the transfer process like? I couldn't think of a better image for file formats than just a whole bunch of question marks. I am not an expert in this area, but and there's really kind of no standard at this point for, at least for video files. The goal, though, should be to create recordings that are either uncompressed or utilize lossless compression and that are saved on widely adopted file formats. So it's really kind of hard to get that combination, but generally speaking, you would want to create files for preservation in either MPEG-2, MOV, or AVI. And then as far as derivatives go, MPEG-4 or MP4 would be a good option. Archives and oral history practitioners have settled on a standard for preserving digital audio, though. And so for your preservation files, you're going to want to save in a WAV or broadcast WAV format, and then your derivatives will be in MP3. So a really good resource for this is Oral History in the Digital Age. And that will be posted on our resources page in just a moment. It gets into some really techie scientific stuff. So if you're into that sort of thing, take a look. Okay, so file descriptions or metadata. And when I say that, I'm talking about everything, you know, from the file naming structure to the elements in your metadata schema. The project team should be making these decisions on metadata and the creation of this descriptive information at the inception of the project. So it's your project proposal and outline. It's the biographical information you are obtaining as you seek interviewees and you're conducting pre-interviews. It's the information you're capturing the day of the interview. So the intro statement on your recordings, the notes and summaries you're taking as you write from the interviews. Most archival staff, like archives, don't have staff to transcribe things all day, abstract, to create this detailed metadata. And you as the interviewer or part of the project team is really the authority on this information. And you should be, again, working with your narrators to make sure that they are represented in the way that they want to be. And so you are passing that information along. You did the project, not the staff at the archive, at the repository that is going to be ingesting this material. So you have the ability to detail the project the way that it should be. And a good resource to get you started thinking about description is Curating Oral Histories by Nancy McKay. And it really is framed in a archivist, cataloger frame of mind, but it talks about all the important details that you need. But before we end, I also do want to share that the Oral History Association Metadata Task Force has been working for like a decade on researching and developing a list of elements that should be considered when you are creating description for oral histories. And you all here today and members of TDL and people who hear about our next webinar will have kind of a preview and be one of the first groups of people that will really get to explore that new set of elements. So our next webinar with TDL, which is on December 10th, will be, it's oral history and metadata, and it's going to be presented by Stephen Seeloff, who is part of the Oral History Metadata Task Force. So he is a good person to be listening in on. And with that, I think we can say at this point, that is all, folks. Adrienne, do you want to wrap up real quick all the things that we went over?
Sure. In a nutshell, what I will say is, we said this at the beginning, there is a lot that was covered today. And we just want you to know that this is surface level, just intro basics for oral history. Our contact information is available. We will do Q&A, but if you have any questions that we are not able to get to or address at this time, please feel free to contact us, because it's a lot. But we want you to know, like, it's a lot, but it's doable. It's awesome. It is great. There are many resources out there for you to look at that transition right there. There are many resources available for you when you're doing your oral history project. And this is whether you are conducting an oral history project from scratch, if you have inherited an oral history project, we've been there, or if you're managing one. Like, these are all great resources that will help you on that journey.
And I'll just post our contact info up here, and we can send out a list. And I know Leah's recording this as well in case you didn't get all of those websites and stuff.
Abra, Adrienne, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a lot. I could see where, like, each one of those slides, we could have a whole webinar. We have about 10 minutes left, and I know we had a couple of questions percolating in the chat. Do you have time?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I do want to revisit the question that you touched on a bit, Adrienne, but The question is, how do you approach sensitive material that may be traumatic or disturbing, especially when providing access to these materials publicly? And do you have a standard or procedure for this?
Okay, the first thing I will say is don't try to spring it up on the person during the interview. That's why the pre-interview process is so important, especially if your topic is involving sensitive material or sensitive matters. For one example, we had a project that was done here about a year before I arrived here called Survivors of Genocide. Beautiful project, well done, but you can already tell there that there are some heavy things that are going to be talked about. So during that pre-interview, you really want to make sure that one, your narrator is comfortable talking about these topics. You want to assess their level of comfort with it. And part of the ethics, and I know sometimes people roll their eyes or get really confused when I say this, with oral history, if we are in the interview and I am asking a question, and let's say someone dodges it, I may try to come back around and ask it a different way. If I am sensing that they are not comfortable talking about that, I will leave it alone. Part of the rights that narrators have, they have the right to discuss or not to discuss any topics that they are not discuss any topics they're uncomfortable with. And also they have the right to withdraw from a project at any time. That scares people, but I will say that I have rarely ever seen that happen. And in the rare cases that has happened, it's because something has happened along the process that they were not informed about ahead of time. So if you are informing that person that, okay, let's say I want to talk about, this is a horrible example, but I'm talking about survivors of trauma, whatever trauma that may be. First, they know what your topic is. Have your project outlined so they understand why you're wanting to talk about this topic, what your importance is with this topic or of discussing this topic. And also they make the decision if they want to participate. So I'm not sure if that was like a roundabout answer, but that's usually what we do in oral history beforehand to make sure that the person is comfortable with even discussing the topic at hand.
And I will add to that kind of an example of experiencing trauma during an interview in which maybe the interviewee and the interviewer both didn't think that it was a traumatizing topic until people started talking about it. And so that's why it's important to keep the relationship going after the fact of the interview, because there can be a lot of processing involved from the interviewee's standpoint about what they just went through because they had suppressed so many things. And so now it's all coming to resurface. So walking, you're not being a counselor, but you are walking through the process with them. You are making sure that they are okay with all the steps that are happening with the project. And you are talking about any considerations that need to be made after the fact.
I think those are really thoughtful answers, and it was really great to hear that this approach starts with your project outline and starts with your interview. And I think one of the questions is kind of follow up to this is, what do you do once the interview has been recorded and it's ready, it's published and ready for access? What kind of trigger warnings, or how do you let people know who are trying to access that content that this might be sensitive?
For the Survivors Project, which is available on our website, what we've done is done a framing of it. So, like, for example, if you want to learn more about the genocide in Bosnia, we give the framework of the history of it. But I mean, from the beginning, like, this is going to include, usually there's some sort of disclaimer of, this may include some sensitive topics. Please be aware that this is the person's experience. It may trigger some things, but you just want to make sure that trying to see, because in some instances, I know you're never supposed to assume, but in some instances, for example, if you're looking at a project titled Survivors of Genocide, you would think that it is assumed that you know that the conversation or topics are going to be heavy, but you do want to put that disclaimer. Also, we put the background information, the historical information. So what was the conflict? What was the cause of this? What was the result? So that you have the historical framework and then you have this person's experience. And sometimes that's helpful in gauging, okay, how am I digesting this versus me going straight into the story? I have a framework or reference point to work off of.
And back to interviewee rights, they do have the right to close interviews for
Yes.
a certain amount of time. They have the right to redact certain information. And so that would be redacted in the transcript, that would be redacted in the audio that you present or the video that you present. So if there is a section of the interview after they've reviewed their interview, you would work with the interviewee to ensure that, again, that representation is appropriate for them.
Okay, that is great. And a question about, do you have ideas or recommendations for good transcription software?
ExpressScribe.
Excellent.
ExpressScribe is that's what I've experienced my whole time as an oral historian. I'm not sure of many others, but I will say that if you are at a public institution or like city government, not that I would know, just like ExpressScribe is like based in Australia. So if you have to write justifications or like payment sometimes can be an issue. I may be going too far into that, but ExpressScribe is what we use for that. And you're able to make sure you have a foot pedal and you can, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying there is a free version still, right?
Yes, there is. There is a free version. And if you get the free version and run out of your, I'm not going to say that, but there is a free version that you can use. And to be honest with you, it's always on sale. So I think you can buy the license for like, was it like less $30?
It's very cheap, and it's the go-to. You know, a lot of people want voice to text transcription software, and speaking from personal experience of trying that as well, you're going to spend just as much time correcting everything that it creates as you would if you had just done the transcription yourself. And transcription is a rite of passage. I don't think that you can call yourself an oral history practitioner until you have transcribed at least one full interview and gone through the pain and suffering of that.
Yes.
Okay, the hazing rituals of oral historians.
That's what it is right there. Yep.
I'm just kidding. So we do, we're almost to 2 o'clock, but we have a couple more questions here. They're really good. Another question is, have you run into Title IX issues? We've had some projects shut down or paused for a long time due to their Title IX office requiring information be submitted to them. And of course, even though privacy has been guaranteed to the participant. Run into this?
Okay, I will say I have not. I do question, like, did your institution require you to do like IRB or something of that nature? And the reason why I asked that is because I am in a very fortunate and blessed situation to where my institute, the relationship we have with our university here is that they understand the work that we're trying to do. Okay, got you. Yes, IRB was submitted and approved. Okay, we're not subject to IRB. And as of right now, I know it was in limbo right now. Oral history is no longer supposed to be regulated by RRB, but it does still, your institution may say something different. We have not run into that issue, and I am actually sorry that that happened to you, because again, if you are promising that privacy for your interviewee, that seems a bit invasive, and I'm sorry for that, but we have not run into that issue.
Yeah, just the practice of oral history is very not in favor of IRBs. And I think we've tried really hard to get that to not be a thing that we have to go through. I haven't run into that either. I came into my new position with a oral history project already going on. And maybe I'm just like plain ignorance. I haven't asked about what some of the steps they've taken to ensure that we can be doing this project.
I am showing a minute after 2 o'clock, and there is one more question, and it's such a good one, and I'd love to get the answers if you have a few minutes to spare.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
I know, Adrienne, you're so hard. Okay, how about this? This says I, but I'm going to say we. We would love to know what motivated each of you, to enter this field.
Okay. Okay, I'm not going to talk too long. I'm really not. Okay. So, I'm going to make sure I don't turn this into a testimony. I'm going to make it quick, I promise. Okay. So, growing up, I went to be an astronaut. AP Physics and AP Calculus killed that dream. So that was just like, okay, let me find something else. I was always really into history and into museums, into libraries. So I went through undergrad, got a double major in English and history, graduated in 2007. Job market wasn't that great. So what do? Go straight to grad school. So I went to UNT. I graduated from Prairie View A&M University, shout out PV, and went to UNT for grad school to get my master's in library science. My last year there, I needed a practicum. I was working a full-time job and was like, Lord, if I'm leaving this full-time job with benefits, is there any way possible I could get an internship that at least pays me? So lo and behold, an ad for, or a call for interns from NASA Johnson Space Center. They were looking for people to work in their history office. And I was like, this isn't gonna work, but let me do it. And plus it was like a week before the application was due. Got the internship, interned with the history office. And any of you who know or may have known what the history office is, because I think it is folded into different things now. It's not what it used to be. That is where I learned about oral history, because they were having the interviews with former flight directors, former astronauts. And it's like, I got a bug of what it was, and it just stuck with me. It was like, oh, this is cool, but didn't think anything else of it. Go on in your career. And I had an interview with Houston Public Library. And in the middle of the interview, they were like, hey, do you know anything about oral history? I was like, well, yes, I do. Let me tell you a thing or two. So that is actually how I got into this. And it is a blessing. I am grateful. It is fun. Like with every career, it has its hiccups and sometimes its frustrations, but I'm blessed and I'm very grateful. So that's it.
We get so emotional when we talk about this because it's like a really big part of our lives. Like it's just turned into that. I started out in radio communications. I got an associate's in radio communications, and I was an announcer for a public radio station in San Antonio. And I was always part-time, and I had gone to apply for a full-time position, and I didn't get it. And I was kind of having like, a crisis in my life. Like, what am I going to do with myself? And so I went back to school for my bachelor's a little later than, what you would typically do. And I was interested in anthropology because I realized I didn't want to like report on the news. I wanted to, or report on culture, because I was an arts and culture reporter. I wanted to kind of like learn more of the hows and whys. And so as I was going to school, taking those classes, learning about field research, I was also working in the library, and I had passed this room that said oral history program. And so that's kind of like what sparked my interest. Obviously, I was familiar with StoryCorps being a part of an NPR affiliate. So I was like, oh yeah, I can just like do this, you know? And and I quickly learned that wasn't the case. And I just had such an amazing experience going through an oral history class and then doing my project independently. So oral history has always kind of been on the periphery of what I do. I've worked in libraries ever since then. And now I'm an archivist, and obviously any archivist will have to deal with oral histories at some point.
Yay, those were good stories. Thank you so much for sharing. And we are quite past the hour at this point, and I don't see any other questions. So just to everyone who's still here, this webinar has been recorded, and we'll also grab the slides to share with y'all in a week or so after we get it captioned and published. Thank you, Adrienne and Abra. This was a totally fun experience, and I hope to see you all again in December for our next oral history webinar.
All right, thank you.
Have a great day.